How has that informed your reality? You're like you're a massive aspect of your life is documenting your experience, putting it on the internet.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing I've always known with making like YouTube videos and stuff is I realized that when I started making daily videos in 2017, there was I noticed that the more vulnerable I would go and the more deep I would go in sharing like different aspects of my life, the more like it would really resonate with people. And almost like a lot of times the things I was afraid to share because I was really like afraid of what people would think about me on my spiritual journey of growth or whatever it is. I've just noticed that the things I'm afraid to share that I actually share, those are the things that end up doing, like, not just do the best, but like resonate the most with the people.
Yeah.
And it's the most easy to share too, because it's stories that are like actually in my life that it's like easy to kind of express out there. So in a way, I become like the guinea pig for my audience. And as I grow, the people that watch me are also able to grow. So like this year for me was 2021 for me was a huge shadow year where I went into my shadow and like did a lot of inner work.
What does shadow mean exactly?
It's like the subconscious parts of ourselves that we were unaware of before. So like me, like, and something me and you've connected quite a bit on is like different aspects of our shadow that we've been shedding this year. For me was like the nice guy, people pleaser mentality. For a long time, I lived under this mentality that like I had to, in order for me to feel safe, I had to please other people and like help them feel a certain way or ease tension in order for me to feel safe. And that mentality of always trying to please other people was like a shadow aspect of myself that for so long I wasn't even aware of. I was like, oh, I'm just a really nice person. This is just how I am. And what ended up happening is I started realizing the negative shadow of that, the negative side effect of that, which was that I'd get taken advantage of. I had problems setting boundaries with people. Sexual polarity in relationships was killed because it was like I wasn't being in my own authentic frame. So it was kind of like I was trying to be somebody that like people liked versus being myself. So the shadow of that was like me becoming aware of that unconscious part of myself. And as I became aware of that, that's when like it started shedding all this light. And my audience on YouTube or my podcast, they were able to see me go through that because they saw how I was before. Even like I'd be afraid to put out certain videos and they could see that like, you know, at least I could see it in myself when I watched my older videos, how much I really wanted people's like validation and approval.
Sure.
And to feel significant, to feel like, oh, I have created like millions of followers on social media and stuff. Like I am this really special person that's like helping people. That became like a part of my identity. So a huge shift for me was like becoming aware of that shadow and like learning to like let that go. And as I did over this last year, like my whole entire life is transformed. But rather than like, maybe some of the way some people would do that is they would like go through the work and then at the end of it, they're like, look, I'm like perfect now. I've got it all figured out. Now my sexual polarity is great in relationship and this and that, you know, whereas I would just share in my videos, like what I'm going through in the moment. Like I just realized this, I was having trouble setting boundaries with this and I felt guilty if I didn't do this, but now it's like, I'm way less attached to outcome.
Yep.
And they can see that. They're like, wow. I get comments and they'd be like, your energy's so different now. But like we were talking earlier, when you're in it and it's like your life, you don't think much of it, you know, but like people can see a difference if they've been watching you for a while or like, you know, maybe a difference you don't see if you're not in it yourself, you know?
Yeah. We, people who are engaging in the video component of this conversation should know that we have some green stuff.
Is it on my face already?
Oh yeah.
No, no. I told you. I said I don't know if I should do it beforehand
But
because it gets all over my face.
no, it's on your face, in the teeth.
In the teeth, yeah.
In the teeth. So we just did some what's referred to as mumbe, which is I don't know if we're supposed to say what it is, but coca leaf is what it is, which is it's a fantastic tool, plant supplement that can be found in most South American countries. It's really helpful with acclimatization. So people,
it is.
People use it in mountain towns.
Yeah, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru. It's very common.
Yeah, I was introduced to it in where was it? I think it was in Juarez, which is in is that in Ecuador? Somewhere in the mountains, in the Andes. And then people use it all the time. It's like a very common thing.
Very
common. It's like tea, essentially.
Yeah.
What the hell is that?
Well, it's funny. It's so from my experience with it, and I guess I've heard David Wolf say that it's like this. It's like the number one superfood or something like that. It's like one of the most healthy things for you, but it is illegal. You know, I think in the States or something like that. But
which illegality is an interesting conversation.
It
as
is.
well, and what it does to certain seemingly benign
yeah,
substances or plants, such as coca leaf. Which, when something becomes illegal, then suddenly there's an impetus to concentrate it,
yes,
and then it becomes something that's actually, you know, like deleterious or dangerous.
yes.
So that's kind of a whole nother interesting conversation of what
It is.
of the effects of
It's sad. It's sad
criminalizing
what
something.
happened with that too, because traditionally for thousands of years, the coca plant was considered something very sacred. It's considered something that's very sacred. That was like, you know, something that a lot of shaman or medicine people use it. But then what they did is they found a way to make money with it by like kind of raping it in a way. That's what they considered a cocaine to be. It's like raping the coca plant and then synthetically mixing it with other things to make it something that's not. But that's the shadow. You talk about the shadow. The shadow of the coca plant is cocaine. It's like that synthetic part of it that's been used in our society. You know, I went through and binged all the Narcos. You ever see the Narcos show?
A little bit.
It's crazy. I got sucked into that whirlwind like a month ago, and I watched every episode of the Colombian one and the Mexican one, which is all about cocaine.
Yeah. Super
and,
interesting.
And it's based on true stories, which is interesting. But that's what cocaine is but the coca plant has this very heart-centered other aspect of it, where it's like the coca plant that's been pulverized into a powder and mixed up with normally some other herbs as well, non-psychedelic. It's more so something that like they say helps bring you from your head into your heart. And when I was telling you before, when we were just doing it a little bit ago, I was like, oh, I'll share it on the podcast if you want, like kind of the way I was explained to it, because I'm not an expert at it by any means, but, you know, I do retreats a couple times a year in Costa Rica. And I bring, you know, subscribers go to it. And we also bring in these amazing medicine people that have been working with the medicine for like, you know, 20, 30 years and plant medicine communities and stuff that are part of different tribes and stuff. But the way they describe it is with Mumbai, they use it in a way that's much more sacred than obviously, you know, cocaine. And it's like nothing like that. It's a powder, you know, goes in the mouth, it absorbs through the gums, and it's way less not concentrated like crazy like that. So it's more like the effects you get, like you feel somewhat stimulated and like kind of present to the moment. But they say it's like a heart medicine. It helps connect your mind to your heart. And the way that they traditionally use it is, say a tribe needs to, people need to like make a hut, for example. What they will do is they will do Mumbai and the night before, and they will come up with all the plans. And they will coordinate all the ideas, and it kind of in a way stimulates or activates the mind to work in such a way to where it helps you, what they say, reorganize your thoughts. So it helps you organize, what are you going to do the next day? And it helps them come together, and they do it in like a community sense, and they come up with how they're going to build the hut, what kind of materials they need, who's going to do what. They organize that whole thing, and that's when they use the Mumbai. And then the next day, they may use Mumbai again and then actually make the hut. But they say that it helps you reorganize your speech. And when you take Mumbai, a lot of times it'll be a big wad in your mouth and you can't speak for sometimes 2 to 5 minutes. And that's a time to really get inside of your body and to listen. And there's rules when you do Mumbai to where you really only talk about the here and now. You don't, there's a tendency sometimes with people that take Mumbai to where you just want to like kind of get gossipy or chattery because it gives you like this stimulated effect. But they say, you know, it makes your words sweeter, and it because it kind of brings you in your heart. It's something that you're meant to do and to connect with other people, but to do it in like a very heart-centered, present moment way. And that's how I was explained from shaman and medicine people. They use the medicine. So when we were doing Hape a little bit ago, and then talking about doing it, I'm like, actually, you know, doing it before a podcast or for a podcast would actually be very fascinating and interesting. You know what I mean?
I think another thing that is very interesting and lacking in my life, and I think a lot of like Western culture, is a lack of like ceremony.
Yes.
And even the concept of ceremony, I think some people hear that and it's like immediate eye roll type reactions, like, oh boy, a ceremony, you know?
Right.
You're going to be like burying your menstruation or dancing
Yeah.
around a tree or something. It's like, what's like
Red Tent Society or something.
Yeah, right. Which like maybe there's some value, in that. I don't, I've never had an experience like that, but in our day, I think it's very easy to kind of just smash together all of these different events, with
Yes.
my significant other, I'm with my business thing, and then I'm
Yeah.
playing, in quotations, and I'm working out, I'm with my kids, and there's not really any type of pattern interrupt.
Right.
And so I find when I do have the opportunity to experience pattern interrupts like this, or like doing like hape, which is like another ceremonial
Yeah.
tobacco thing you blow up your nose like snuff.
Yeah.
When I do things like that, I'm always oftentimes leading into it a little resistant, and then during and after I'm like, oh man, I need more of that.
Yeah.
And I think it's such a really beautiful thing to have those pattern interrupts, to kind of take a moment, reflect, self-examine, like, okay, what the hell am I really doing here?
Right.
And then move forward from there,
Yeah.
as opposed to just smashing everything together,
Yes.
and that's something, it seems like you do integrate that into your life.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of times these plants and certain like things we call ceremony, they're sometimes tools, but they're a way of enhancing different aspects of our own consciousness. I think that a lot of these plants that we might experiment, whether it is plant medicine or something like Mumbai or Hape, they're these reflections of our own consciousness that allow us to like connect to different aspects of ourself, to like enhance different energies. I have a friend of mine who does, have you ever heard of plant dietas?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Yeah, where they like, basically what they do is they connect to the consciousness of a certain plant, which carries a certain energy. And one of my best friends.
What does that mean? I'm big on defining anything that could be like metaphysical.
Or ambiguous. Yeah. So like, for example, I have a friend, my friend Patty, she's doing a plant dieta right now with rose. So rose is a plant, and like the consciousness of rose, she finds, at least through her own experience, that rose teaches her self-love, worthiness, compassion. So when she diets with rose, what that means is she eats a very bland diet. She doesn't do a lot of salt. She's supposed to not have sex with her husband, and like there's like you kind of deprive yourself of certain sensual pleasures so that you can really focus on the consciousness of like what you're bringing in.
Yep.
And then she uses like rose essential oil. She drinks like a rose tea every day. She like spends times meditating with and like meditating with rose in a way, and then seeing what she can learn from it. And she's learned some very interesting things from different plants. She's done a dieta with sage before. The energy of sage has a very different like vibe than rose. Sage is very much about boundaries. We use sage to like cleanse energy, So if you need to bring in more energy in your life where maybe you need to set more boundaries, and rose tends to have a little bit more of a bitchy like mentality, like where it's like, this is how it is. This is what you're going to do. Kind of like that. So connecting to that energy, it's like bringing in that archetype of like firm boundaries, of not feeling apologetic about what you are, what your needs are, voicing your opinion more, cleansing negative energy, and having the courage to look into your shadow. Like these plants, they have a way of like, I think, directing us towards certain aspects of our own consciousness that maybe we can elevate. It's similar to archetypes, I think.
Yeah.
But that's what they kind of do with the, working with the plants, and even the plant medicines that we do, whether it's ayahuasca or San Pedro or peyote. These are all different like aspects of our consciousness that I think that allow us to like tap into different levels of ourself.
Yeah. It's so cool thinking about the way like Native American culture, or maybe various different like Eastern cultures, Native American in particular, model a good chunk of their personalities and lives and interactions around nature.
Yeah.
There's like,
I think it's really cool.
Like the coyote is like, oh, cool. That's like we're playing tricks.
Right.
We're being kind of
It's like the trickster energy, right?
Or maybe like eagle probably means something, and,
freedom,
leopard, like they all have different meanings. And it's like taking the time and the spaciousness in one's life to be able to observe the surroundings and be able to actually like be a student to the world.
Yes.
As opposed to just kind of blindly being in one's own tunnel, just kind of continuing to march forward,
hustle it out or whatever.
Yeah, it's cool, man. I feel like we've been like denatured in some ways. And then when you talk about things like that, I can almost hear like a reticence in my voice to not kind of get jarbled up with some kind of new age
Right.
nonsense.
Yeah.
But a lot of that stuff is totally legit.
Yeah, and I think what it really comes down to is like belief systems as well. Like a lot of what I teach is like our beliefs create our reality, and that everything in life has no meaning other than the meaning we give it. So even like a rose, for example, that probably wouldn't resonate with somebody that maybe doesn't buy into that belief system, that like rose has consciousness or that sage has a consciousness that you can connect to. But it's like a permission slip for people to tap into different aspects of their own consciousness. Because sometimes even like my friend Patty that like does these plant dietas, she's like, oh, Rose was telling me this or Sage was telling me that. And sometimes my eyes kind of glaze over because I'm like, it's like she has a consciousness in of herself, but it's like a very valuable permission slip for her to tap into something that really does benefit her. Like if I learned, like one thing she learned was like, when she was like, her sexual dynamics with her husband, it's like, oh, not to confuse sex with love, even though it is an expression of love, but like it's not the only form of love, right? Like there's these valuable insights that she's had to where she's been able to like develop more self-love beyond just the act of sex or beyond just certain things because of it. So it's like a permission slip for that. But when I think about it, even when I hear her talk sometimes about sage and rose and all these things, I'm like, well, they're really just, it's the meaning we give it. So then we're able to tap into these other aspects of ourself that like we resonate with or that we get some type of value of. So is it true or not true? I think it just depends. It depends on what that person gets out of it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because there's people that may look at plant medicine like ayahuasca and San Pedro or even like Mumbai or Hape, and they may see no value in it. And I think that's totally valuable. Like that's their belief system. And I think it's great. The cool thing is like we live in a reality where whatever we believe to be true is like our filter, our lens through which we see the world, but not necessarily does like one person's belief system have to be agree. That's where we get into conflict and stuff because we don't all agree as to what the best model of reality is or what the best meaning is of these different things.
Sure.
You know what I mean? So it's interesting, but yeah, everything comes down to, I think, meaning, the meaning we give things, the belief systems we resonate with. And then there is a level of freedom that comes when you expand out of certain belief systems. You know what I mean? Or you just see it for what it is as like a permission slip,
Yeah. I think the belief systems that are interesting is like the belief of who we are, who we think we are.
Mm-hmm.
And you have an interesting history where you went from being a vegan ladies shoe salesman
Yep. That is true.
to somehow converting and being overweight at one point as well, and being really thin, I think, at one point as well.
Yeah.
So kind of having fluctuations with that. To converting yourself intentionally or unintentionally, I'd be curious to understand like the path, and to essentially being like a modern day, you're like a Dale Carnegie meets Napoleon Hill meets Tony Robbins meets Matthew Hussey meets.
I appreciate that, man. My ego loves hearing that.
But you've done a really good job at being, I think, a bridge to be able to convey a lot of esoteric, what would be conceived to be kind of like metaphysical, perhaps like woo-woo concepts into something that is more grounded, tangible, and actualizable in one's daily life.
Yeah.
To actually have like tangible value, like do this now.
Right.
It will create impact.
That's the thing. Thank you for saying all that. I appreciate that. And the thing that I've always really loved, not just learning the esoteric, because I went through a phase back in 2012 when I went through my awakening where I became very ungrounded.
What does awakening mean?
Awakening, like prior to that 2012, I was very kind of like, you could say, just bought into the social conditioning of having the 9-to-5 job, going to work, doing this. Like I felt like a lot of the pain of my past like made me who I was. And I thought like reality was like there was just like, I don't know if it's this, or there was an aspect, there was no spiritual real component to my life in 2012, even though like I grew up a certain way, was like kind of forced to go to church and stuff like that. But in 2012, I had like this awareness or this awakening to where I realized that, at least this is my experience, that we are eternal spiritual beings living temporary human experiences. And I found that through meditation. I found that through meditating and going inwards. And I realized and could kind of like start taking myself out of a lot of the things I experienced growing up whether it was a painful past or whatever it was. And I could start to see that I thought that's what made me who I was. But as I started to kind of question some of the beliefs I had and some of like the pain of my past and stuff like that, I could see that that led me to a space of like a lot of pressure was created to where I then woke up. It's hard to explain. I know what you're asking. You're asking like the definition of like, you know, like what does it mean for spiritual awakening? But it's like, for me, it's being aware that we're eternal spiritual beings living temporary human experiences.
Yeah.
And when I started meditating, I started observing my thoughts more. And I, in a way, started realizing like this avatar body that like we're all a part of is like, prior to that, I thought that this was just who I was. My ego was like me. And then I started to observe the ego more. I started to observe my thoughts more. And I started to realize that like there's just more to life than like what I thought, in a way. And I started seeing why I was the way I was, and questioning a lot of the negative beliefs that I had. And my whole entire life transformed from that moment onwards.
Was there a primary catalyst? And I also want to define, this is probably getting obnoxious at this point, but define spiritual.
See that there's elements to it, because that does get confusing too. Like the terminology of it, because from one, you could say our spirit is like we're eternal spiritual beings having temporary human experiences. So there's like the spiritual part of ourselves that like we're reconnecting to, where maybe we forgot that that's who we are. I think if we go a little bit more esoteric for a second, I think that because we're eternal spiritual beings living temporary human experiences, we forget who we are when we come here. Mm-hmm. It's like we come here to kind of like forget who we are so that we can go through a process of remembering that this is kind of like a temporary experience that we're having. And in a way, it becomes kind of fun once you have certain realizations, because reality becomes kind of more like a game. Mm-hmm. And but then as you go through maybe a spiritual awakening, I think that spirituality gets kind of like a rap where it's like you are spiritual when you're meditating with your crystals and you're looking at the candle flame and you're like doing some type of yoga. When at the deepest levels, I think spirituality just is life. Yeah. You know, like anything can be spiritual. Like sometimes, a lot of times that happens when I went through my awakening in 2012, I thought money was bad. You know, money's a control system. It's created because of this. Like the money's not backed by gold. I developed this really negative belief about money. And then guess what? I didn't attract money, because why would I attract money if I also think it's bad? I'd be a bad person to have it. Those were like some unconscious beliefs that I started to adopt in this spirituality ego, because it's a very common thing too to develop very strong spiritual ego when you go through a spiritual awakening, because then you wake up and you're like, why? Like I'm starting to remember who I am at a greater level, and at the deepest level, we're all connected. We're all one consciousness anyways, but it's like, why am I knowing all this? Or like, why did this spontaneously kind of happen for me? But there's still a lot of people that aren't aware of this. Yeah. And then in 2012, that's when I became ungrounded, and I was just meditating all the time. I became vegan on a whim, and I started losing a lot of weight, and like family members and friends thought I was on drugs when I wasn't. I wasn't doing anything. I was just losing weight because I was like vegan and stopped eating enough. And and so like on the outside looking in, then I started feeling alone, and I felt like people didn't understand me, and I felt like this need to like prove myself. But as I've gone through my own journey, I've realized that like life is spiritual itself. Like even making money is like, money is just energy, you know? So, and I think that we come here to have a 3D, like a physical experience. So money's not bad. You know, money's a resource. Money's just energy. You exchange and you put out value into the world, and that comes back as like money is just a form of one of the forms of abundance that we can receive, you know? Yeah. But I think there's something to be said that like, I think some of the most spiritual people on the planet don't even know what spirituality is. You know, it's like it could be the fisherman that's going to, the fisherman or fisherwoman that's going to go fish. Yeah,
same,
you know what I mean?
Same with like health. If you're like a health fitness,
they might not know like the 12 biohacking optimization things where you sit in the sauna for 12 minutes and then they're
living it.
They're just living it. Exactly. And probably a lot of it's like with your teachings and stuff, like it's getting back to nature. Yeah. Right? It's like eating food that like is like natural for us to eat. You know, it's like, it's stuff like that versus it being, you know, kind of like the spiritual ego thing of like, you know, I think sometimes there's like I want to make a video soon. It's called like the significant star seed or something like that. Cause you know, like there's this this common thing where it's like people don't want to be here. They want to like go back to their like spiritual home or something like that. But it's completely discounting why we're actually here and the physical human experience, which I think is beautiful.
Yeah,
you know,
Ram Dass has a bit where he's talking to his like channeled fella called Emmanuel, and Emmanuel, he's like asking him questions. Emmanuel suggested to Ram Dass that he's so wrapped up in being this transcendent spiritual person, he's missing the curriculum of a human incarnation. So he's like, you've incarnated to be a human. Like, this is your school.
Yeah.
Like, take the curriculum, asshole. Like, what are you trying to buy? Like dropped you into this amazing Ivy
and you're
League
just trying to
school.
get back up here.
Like, you're trying to come. Like, no. Like, you were sent to school. Like, open the fucking book.
Yeah.
I think it's an interesting thing we were talking before of like some maybe deeply instilled, perhaps puritanical principles of inherently being like a sinner, or being like a naughty boy or a naughty girl. And I wonder within that, if I feel like I have stuff like this of feeling like undeserving of certain things. So maybe it could be, or that it's wrong to have, like, I think love and money are really obvious ones in most people's lives. How does a person start to be able to examine their relationship with love and money? They could be two separate chapters, or maybe they're integrated. Or
a lot of times I find that there isn't a thread that integrates both of them, because from all the stuff all the content I've created and the people that I've worked with, the thing that I've noticed is a lot of times it stems back to childhood. And there's like, let's say we have beliefs about money, and we can say, oh, money is bad, or money is this, or I don't deserve it. Or then love, it's like, I'm used to having someone that's emotionally unavailable, so this feels comfortable to me, or I'm not worthy of like somebody that's really there, or like I have an abandonment wound from like a parent that like left, or emotionally or physically. Like, there's core beliefs we have about ourself, about our identity, about reality itself, that I think stems into both of those different sectors. But the first and most powerful like part of the process is the awareness. It's becoming aware of the beliefs. It's becoming aware of what your story is. The story, like, is a belief. It's kind of the same terminology I use, kind of intermingled. But what are your stories about money? What are your stories about love? And then a degree deeper than that is like, what are my stories about myself? And you'll find a lot of times that there's like a core incident that happened when we're children, when we're kids, where something happened and we gave that a meaning that said that I'm not good enough, or I'm not worthy. Like, for example, we may have had like an emotionally unavailable parent when we're a kid, maybe even like 1 or 2 years old, and we don't even really remember, but maybe like we needed or wanted or craved love from one of our parents, but maybe they were emotionally unavailable because they were going through their own shit. Well, in the moment that, like, imagine you're a baby and you're just sitting there and you're wanting like love or attention, and then you look over at your mom or your dad and they're just in their own heads and they're like thinking about something else and they're not paying attention to you. As a kid, or even a 1 or 2 or 3 year old, we then internalize that and we say, oh, there's something, we get anxious and we feel anxious. Like, why are my needs not being met? There's something wrong with me. I didn't do, maybe if I'm quiet, maybe if I do this, we then try to like gauge ourselves to other to try to get our needs met.
It's like you're gamifying attention.
Yes, exactly. Gamifying attention, validation, significance. But then we develop this belief in this shame. I think a lot of times it goes down to shame. We have this shame that says, I'm broken. There's something wrong with me. And shame is identity based. Whereas guilt, if we did something wrong, it's like, I'm a good person and I meant well, but I did something wrong. Guilt is less of a step than shame. Shame's a little bit deeper to the core identity.
Is shame a protective mechanism because it's safer for you to be broken than your custodian, whoever's taking care of you? You don't. Shame does not want to be seen or to be found out. Like, I'm reading the book Will right now by Will Smith. Have you read that? Or it's very interesting because his whole life, Will Smith, the fucking the Men in Black guy, this guy that's like, the Independence guy, the guy, the Bad Boys guy, like the guy we watched growing up. He created his personality and his, like, who he is. He's become a people pleaser. He talks about this in his book and stuff, which is crazy to see because he's the badass character that you see, right? But he says the reason he created himself to be who he is, the guy that makes everyone laugh, the guy that's just super charismatic, is to hide the shame he feels because he feels like he's a coward.
The reason he feels like he's a coward is because when he was a young kid, he's like the oldest brother. His dad was beating the shit out of his mom. And when that happened, he couldn't protect his mom. He was too young. He was too afraid to protect his mom. And he felt like there was nothing he could do. And he then made the choice or made the decision that like he had all this shame around him not being able to protect his mom. So his whole life and his whole like trajectory of even his success has been built on this need for him to hide the truth in his eyes, which of course isn't a truth, but his belief that he's a coward. So he'd create this character and this way of being that gets him all the validation, all the attention, and all the approval of so many people to hide the shame around being a coward, because it was hard for him to step up to his abusive dad, who was an alcoholic. So it's interesting because these core, I think we all have like core stories that even like our parents divorcing, if we had our parents divorced, my parents divorced when I was 5. As kids, we internalize everything to think it's all because of us. So if our mom or our dad divorce, we don't have the intellect we do now. We're like, oh, well, they just didn't get along and it was better for the kids. And we intellectualize it and we analyze it and we can see clearly, that makes sense, right? As a kid, though, we internalize everything. Mom and dad are breaking up because I am not good enough.
And that's the survival mechanism.
And that's a survival mechanism. Exactly. And that's the shame. I'm broken.
They're the protectors of you.
Yes.
If they're broken, then you're in a really rough spot.
Yes.
But if you're broken and you're in a safe space,
yes,
it's ultimately would I think psychologically feel safer.
Yes.
At least my container is safe. I'm totally screwed.
Right.
But if the
that's a good distinction.
If the container's unsafe, then you'll reposition that, because you need to create this story that there's a safe container, I think, as a young person.
Yes. And see, that's what happens with people pleasers, because what they do is they will only feel safe if they're tuning themselves to other people to get other people to feel validation and approval, because then they can relax. But if that validation goes away, they then feel anxious and they're trying to find it somewhere else. So, especially in my community, I think I get a lot of people that follow me that are what they call empaths. You've heard of like somebody that's very empathetic and can feel other people's emotions and stuff.
Sometimes wildly ungrounded.
And wildly ungrounded, yeah.
Sometimes.
Many times, I find. But yes. And there's a way of using that, because I think it can be, like, I've always been very receptive to people's emotions and intentions, because my ex-stepmom from 7 to 15 years old that was in my life was physically, mentally, and like emotionally abusive. She was like an army sergeant, and she ran the show. She took control. My dad's a fire investigator, so he was gone 24 hours a day, back 24 hours a day, but she pretty much ran the show. She brainwashed us not to want to talk to our real mom, so it was just my dad and my ex-stepmom. My dad was gone half the time. My brother and I weren't allowed to, and I don't want to get into the sob story of it, but this is kind of like, it kind of shows why I became the way that I did, because my brother and I weren't allowed to have friends. We had to earn going to school activities. A lot of times we were locked out of the house and had to do yard work. And then for 8 hours, we'd be outside drinking water out of a hose and stuff. We had to, like, if friends wanted to hang out at school, we'd have to come up with weird excuses why not, because the truth is we just weren't allowed. But it was embarrassing just to not be allowed to have friends and stuff like that. And we were also very, like, malnourished. Like, we were given a bowl of cereal in the morning and a TV dinner at night. So for 7 to 15, and my dad divorced her when I was 15, when my grandma, like, talked some sense into him. We were like, I was like 110 pounds. All of a sudden I started looking healthier. My whole entire life transformed. But I can see that from tuning myself to my ex-stepmom, from tuning myself to my environment, because my ex-stepmom is a narcissist. She's not in my life anymore, but I had to tune myself to her to feel safe in a way, because if she was like having an episode or something, I had to know what she was feeling to know how I had to be in order to go under the radar, so I didn't get hit, beat, emotionally, physically, like things taken away from me, kicked outside for like the next 8 hours. Like that was a survival mechanism that I created to get my needs met. The craziest thing happened too when my dad divorced my ex-stepmom and I was 15 years old. We went to the house that I lived at. And we moved back into our grandma, so we had like 3 or 4 people. My brother, my dad, and I, and my grandma and grandpa lived all in this small. We moved into like this, like 800 square foot house, but we had freedom, so it was cool. But we went back to the other house to like grab our stuff, and I remember going back, and it was really emotional. My ex-stepmom was yelling with like her mom, which is my ex-grandma, I guess, and they were like throwing our clothes on the dirt outside, and she was very bitter about it. But I remember feeling that even though I had all of this freedom now, that freedom to me scared the shit out of me because I felt safe. Even though, like what my brother and I would do, my younger brother and I, we would sneak into the house when we were working outside for 8 hours. We would grab the remote. We would put on the TV and we'd have to have our finger on the previous channel on the remote so that if somebody came home, we would push the previous channel so that it would go back to the channel that it was originally on so they don't know that we were on the TV. And then we would run outside, lock the door, and then like keep working when they got home, you know? That was the kind of like weird reality that we lived in order to get our needs met. And even like, you know, if my ex-stepmom, if she knew that I wanted to go to like a band camp tournament, then she would find a reason to take it away from me. But if I pretended like I didn't want to go to that, I was like, you know, I really didn't practice band. I really don't want to go to that band camp thing. She goes, oh, you don't think you're going? You're going. You're going. It's your fault you didn't practice, right? But if I wanted to go, she'd be like, oh, you think you're going? You didn't do the chores or so. It's like whatever we want. So I had to like tune myself to like get my needs met, you know? But that was my safe container. So even though I had all this freedom now, I felt anxiety with that. So I remember when she was throwing all that shit on the ground and it was this dramatic thing, I remember just the anxiety that came with knowing that I had all this freedom now. And I can see why people have Stockholm syndrome. I see why some people, they go back to like an abusive person because that creates a sense of safety. Even after my ex-stepmom left my life when I was 15 years old, there was an unconscious pattern in myself where I craved someone to give me rules. So what did I do? My first girlfriend was someone I was with for 4 years. She was very controlling. She was very jealous. And I had to tiptoe and walk on eggshells around my ex-girlfriend for 4 years. Then I woke up to that and realized, oh, I don't deserve this. And then I broke up with her. It was like this big dramatic breakup. And a week after that, I was working at Nordstrom's in women's shoes and Brass Plum Shoes, which is like a women's shoe department. A week after breaking up with her, I got transferred to a better shoe department, salon shoes, designer shoes, right? It's a commission-based job, so that's like a promotion. This department, the manager of that department, she was a clone of my ex-stepmom. Controlling, manipulative. She would talk down to people. She got away with it because she was protected by upper management. There was always someone in my life to give me that structure and to give me that frame because I felt safe with it until 2012 when I went through my awakening. In 2012, I went through my awakening and I became aware. And really what happened is I forgave my ex-stepmom. I could see that my ex-stepmom was a narcissist and she created her own sense of like safety because her dad beat the shit out of her. So I was able to kind of like empathize with her a little bit and forgive her. And when I did, within 2 weeks, that manager got fired. She was my manager for 4 years. We tried getting her fired like so many times for crazy shit, but she was so protected by upper management that there was nothing we could do. She made people cry and stuff. It was crazy how much reality shifts based on the internal shifts that I've made in my life. So it's like, it sounds egotistical though. Like, am I saying that manager got fired simply because I forgave my ex-stepmom and did the inner work? I don't know. All I know is that reality has always reflected back to me the inner work that I've done. And if I crave significance or if I crave structure or rules, I attract people into my life to give them to me. Yeah. So that I have to walk on eggshells around people because that was what's familiar from 7 to 15.
Well, which there probably is some deep metaphysical quantum conversation happening that's like beyond my ability to translate. But I think like a really obvious, tangible, grounded perspective of how we're affecting each other is certain people will resonate with certain other people. And we're kind of informing each other's personalities based off of the way that we show up. And so if you show up in a way that where you're like, you feel really strong, independent, not attached, whatever, that type of way. Yeah. Then that will inform the way that a person that may be kind of, they take advantage of you or maybe kind of, abusive or whatever it may be, suddenly it like throws a wrench into their system. Yep. And so you didn't say anything, you didn't do anything. You just, maybe it's postural patterns, maybe it's like visual cues, maybe there's something going on there. It conveys all of these millions of bits of information to that other person's processing chip, their personality, and then they communicate in a certain way. And that's a very like, like energy. Yeah. Yeah. Like it is. Energy.
It's funny. Exactly based on what you're saying right now, I have a friend of mine that was in a relationship with somebody that he like fell madly in love with very quickly. And after he was, he's like one of my best friends. He fell in love with this chick, and they were dating, and everything was great for like the first month. But then after that, there were like these little episodes that would come out, and this person he was dating, it became very apparent that this person he was dating had what could be called borderline personality disorder, BPD. Where it's like she would like blow when things were really, really good, it was really great, and when things were not great, then it was like really bad. But he was like always walking on eggshells around her. If he said the slightest little thing, she would like blow up. Eventually, through like, you know, us talking and stuff like that, he started to realize that pattern. He became like aware of it. And then what happened is he simply, you know, one time she found in his bathroom, she found a headband from like his ex-girlfriend from months ago underneath like this inside the back of a drawer, like hidden. He had no idea it was there. She found a headband. She started freaking out on him. She like threw the headband at him and was like saying all this, like blowing up on him. And he would normally like feed into that. You know what I mean? He'd be like, oh, I'm so sorry. I just didn't see the headband, blah, 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 blah. And what eventually happened though is he started realizing the pattern, and then he got to a place of, he came back to himself because he was also realizing that a lot of the way he was treating his girlfriend was the way he treated his mom, because his mom was always on edge. So he kind of made that awareness. Sure. But then what he did is he simply stopped buying into it. And he was like, what you're feeling right now is not, you know, he wasn't like invalidating her emotions, but he's like, I've done nothing wrong. I didn't know the headband was there. And he just responded completely different. But she almost couldn't accept that he was so nonchalant about it and that he wasn't feeding her frame. He wasn't trying to tiptoe around her. He wasn't buying into like her drama, that she just left. Like she just couldn't even be in his energy because he wasn't feeding her gears. He wasn't feeding her like the way that she sees reality.
Well, you're nourishing a parasite.
Exactly. So he wasn't feeding that parasite. It's well said. I like that.
Yeah, the parasite wants to survive.
And if it's not being fed, then it's like, where the hell is it? You know what I mean? But once he did that,
our reactions are nutrients.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
It is. It's interesting how
it's maybe toxic, and it's like McDonald's.
It's toxic.
Sugar,
for sure.
High fructose corn syrup, but it sounds like
yeah, but there's benefit in not feeding the parasites, the candida, wherever the hell it is. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was interesting. You mentioned when your mom was the abusive one? You guys were
the stepmom.
Stepmom, yeah.
Ex-stepmom. My mom was great, but she was my ex-stepmom brainwashed, told us a whole bunch of stuff that wasn't true about her mom. She made us write like mean letters to our mom and shit. And then my mom wasn't in my life from like 7 to 15. And then when my dad divorced my ex-stepmom, then our mom came back and we were able to have a relationship with her again.
It's such an interesting thing as you're saying that, you know, like as below, so above, as you are at your place watching TV and you have your finger on the clicker and you're ready to put it back. It's like we don't extinguish anything through shame or guilt.
Yeah.
It still plays out. We just stash it to some dark crevice. You know, in this case, the dark crevice was where your stepmom couldn't see.
Right.
But you still play it out. You still do the thing. That urge, it doesn't just go away through abuse or through, you know, like any of those things.
Yeah.
And so it's like you know, and that kind of comes into the criminalization of certain substances, such as like coca leaf from the Andes.
Right.
You criminalize it, and then suddenly we have to make this like, we have to put it into the shadow.
Yeah.
And then we have to make this like nasty, dangerous, high concentrated form of it so it's more effective to ship. Because if we get busted shipping, you know, 100 kilos of coca leaf, that's only worth
so much
$400 or whatever. It's like, oh, it's, you know, it would be worth more than that, but still, it's like
that was a funny part of the show Narcos is when because it's based on like the true story or whatever. But the one of the biggest problems was they're shipping out this cocaine.
Yeah,
the dollar amount of it is mattresses full of like dollars to make up like a very small amount. Yeah. So like that was an issue because that's how much money it creates. But imagine they had to ship like hundreds and hundreds of or thousands of tons of like a powder that's not concentrated. You know,
and so that through that criminalization, you make this high concentration version of the thing. It's still the same thing. It was just this benign, innocent coca leaf.
Yeah,
that just wanted to jerk off or wanted, you know, whatever, you know, wanted to, like whatever the thing is that it was as a young boy or girl. It's like, oh, cool. You know, I think shame around sexuality is a really obvious one. Yeah, you know, I have a penis or a vagina. Like, you know, it feels good to let a hot tub blower hit it or something like that. And your mom finds out and shames. You're like, ah, and then it's like, boom, there's the inciting moment.
Yeah.
Like there's the trauma. And now suddenly we need to reconstitute that into something that's maybe like on the face socially acceptable,
Yeah.
but it's still turning in the back end.
Yes.
And then eventually you have, industry that starts to build up around, now I'm jumping back to the cocaine example.
Right.
You've created this, concentrated form of it, the
Yeah.
shadow form of it.
Yeah.
And then if it's not addressed in like a healthy, holistic, accepting, way, then it just keeps on building and building and building.
Yeah.
And soon the shadow, the mafia is bigger.
Cartel.
The cartel becomes bigger than the government itself.
Right.
And then
Yeah.
it's like, oh wow, like the shadow's really taken over.
Yeah. I like that metaphor because it's exactly what happened. That's exactly what happened.
Yeah. So how does a person start to come into a place of, this is like my perennial question with conversations like this, like how does a person start to come into a place of self-examination to actually even know like the systems that they're running?
It's for me what worked for me was just meditation. Observing my thoughts and starting to ask myself different questions, like why do I have this motivation? Like starting to question things. And we're so in daily reality and like into the grind of things, especially like having a 9-to-5 job. We're going to work every day, talking to the same people every day and doing the same rhythms that we kind of get like hypnotized and desensitized, like this is the norm.
Yeah.
But when we start to question it and we start to ask ourselves, why do I, like what would I have to believe is true to be having this kind of experience? Like even when I worked a 9-to-5 job, it's like I had to become aware that there was a part of me that believed that was either that was the limit to what I was worthy of. And I also had to become aware that I felt comfortable in a 9-to-5 job because I got, a paycheck every week from it. I had to it's really the questions that we ask ourselves with awareness and observation of our own thoughts. And that's why meditation, I think, is probably one of the most powerful things people can learn, is just how to it's not something you really learn how to do, but if you just sit there for like 5 or 10 minutes in the morning, you observe your thoughts, not try to control them, you start to realize there's a lot of patterns. There's a lot of consistent thoughts that might come up. But then it's also just taking like honest self-reflection on like, where are you? And the biggest way to know where you are is to kind of like just look around. Like if you live in a like a certain type of house, even like middle class, like you live in a middle class house, then you most likely have a belief system that's equal to that. This is the way we, and there's nothing wrong. It's not like you need a huge gigantic house to be happy, but it's just, if you're in a relationship that maybe is abusive, then it's like, okay, well, there's a part of myself that must believe that I deserve this for me to even allow it in. It's starting to look at where you are and to realize what is the belief that's the stilts or the beliefs that's holding this system in place. And as you start to become aware of it, you start to see that it's a belief or it's a story or it's something that you believe about yourself. So then instead of you seeing it as this is the way reality is, this is inherently built into reality, you see it for the belief that it is. You see it for what it is, which you start to separate thought from your identity, thinking that this is who I am.
Yeah.
So it's like then you're able to kind of see it from a different perspective. But the thing that I teach a lot is just it's becoming aware of these patterns and just making the choice to let them go. And that's it. Like sometimes people, you have to focus on wiring in and like the success affirmations and all that stuff. And that's not something I've been making videos for years on YouTube, so I'm sure I have videos on affirmations and shit like that. But and I see value in it. But I think a lot of this is like, do you feel worthy? Let's say you believe you're unworthy. Do you feel worthy by saying, I'm worthy, I'm 100% worthy, whole and complete. I appreciate this aspect of myself. It's less about that, I think, and more about getting to the core and releasing and letting go of the shame that we may have built growing up, or letting go of the belief that like we're not worthy. And then starting to ask ourselves, well, why would we believe we're not worthy? What are the rules we have to say we are worthy?
Yeah.
Is it once I make a certain amount of money, or is it, what are the rules? And then we start to like become aware of our own innate systems that a lot of times were passed on from our parents. It's interesting. Like a lot of the belief systems we have, we either developed in childhood or they were just hand-me-downs from our parents. There's a book called It Didn't Start With You by Mark Woolham. And it's a book about ancestral trauma and how we inherit it from our parents. And we'll find that even in generational patterns, the same patterns that our grandparents or great-grandparents dealt with are energies that we're dealing with. So it's like we realize that a lot of the shit we're carrying around isn't even our own. So we can analyze it all we want. We can become aware that like, oh, my dad's a people pleaser. The reason my dad allowed a narcissist into his life is because he had this people pleaser mentality and he was seeking fame, or he was seeking like the security in someone else. And he found that in my ex-stepmom. And that was a pattern he had that his dad also had. His dad was an alcoholic, but his dad had that pattern with my grandma. And that's why they got divorced or whatever, because it was like, it's this stuff gets passed down, but becoming aware of it is key. And that's a lot of times the key to the shame. One of the biggest things people can do to like release the shame is realizing that your parents divorced when you were 5 or whatever age, your dad emotionally abandoning you or physically abandoning you, or your mom physically or emotionally abandoning you. It's not your fault. It's not your fault. It's something that happened, but it's not because it's realizing that's their stuff, not mine. And as we start to separate that, we start to realize that we just thought for so many years that it was our shit. You know, that mom or dad left because we're not good enough. But then we could see, oh, even my ex-stepmom that was abusive. It's like, oh, that was her stuff. She was angry and she was acting it out because her dad beat the shit out of her.
Yeah.
You know, it's like that was her stuff. Now, it doesn't invalidate, because there's an inner child inside a lot of us, I think, that also wants to be seen and heard. So it's not about just saying, I intellectually understand that it's not my fault, but it's like also nurturing a side of our inner child, like hearing that version of us. Like, what is the version of us that's maybe 5 years old that felt, or 2 or 3 years old that felt abandoned?
Yeah.
And like kind of tapping into that part of ourselves and feeling it. And a lot of times in the feeling, that's where the healing starts to come.
That's the thing, as you're saying, like releasing and like letting go and words like that. I think that that's very like high level. And I don't know if we ever completely release a thing. I wonder if it's more just like alchemizing a relationship or shifting a relationship.
Yeah.
And so that's something that I question. Sometimes I feel like it can be a lot of pressure to release the shame, release the guilt, release, whatever.
Yeah.
That's a big step. It's like, okay, it's completely gone.
Right.
Compared to welcoming it.
Yeah, and even just letting yourself feel the shame.
Engaging with a conversation with it. Instead of it being like, oh, there it is, you gotta release it.
Yeah.
It's like, no, what if you open your door even wider?
Well, that is, I think, one of the keys to letting it go.
Yeah.
Is you must feel it to heal it.
Yeah, like
so
jumping into the dragon's mouth.
Yes. Going into it. When I went through, last year, I went through a huge shift where I was feeling so much shame and I felt rejected by like an ex-girlfriend, and I felt like I wasn't good enough. And I realized that a lot of that was playing out my mom's stuff and me feeling like, not worthy. But I went into it and I allowed myself to feel it. And as I did, that's what like released a lot of the energy, is allowing it to be there. And it's a funny thing, when we resist emotion, it either suppresses itself or it creates more pressure.
Yeah.
But if we just let the emotion flow through, it like can begin to release. And I think that's why breath work is so powerful.
Yeah.
That's why like just being present in the emotion is so powerful. So like letting go is like feeling it and knowing that it's not a problem that needs to be fixed.
Yeah. It's like becoming excited to look under your bed.
Yeah.
There's monsters.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's like, dude, just look.
Yeah.
Like, see, like they're,
maybe there is, maybe there's not, but
but the reality is, as long as you're on top of the bed, there definitely are monsters.
Yeah.
Because you might be creating them.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like repatterning a person's relationship to, my friends, the Yes Theory guys, Omar and Kurt, their brand is called Seek Discomfort.
Yeah.
And I think that's an interesting thing, starting to renegotiate our relationship with discomfort, and like the things that we seek out, as opposed to continually seeking solace and continually seeking like safety.
Yeah. It's
like, what would it be like to actually be excited to look under the bed, like whatever the metaphorical bed is.
Yeah. And the funny thing is that as you have that courage, I think it takes courage to do that. But as you do that to seek discomfort, you're seeking the unsafe, but then you expand your sense of safety, because then you start to feel safe in the unknown. Mm-hmm. I think that's like a side effect of that. So it's like, it's a funny paradox, because as you become more okay with that and as you step more into that, you then become more safe in the unknown, which then helps you in all aspects of life, like let go and all of that,
Yeah. Where are you at with this stuff now?
Now,
I think it's easy to when we're especially recording a conversation or
Yeah.
writing an Instagram post or a YouTube thing.
right.
It's like we want to present as though we've got it figured out, but then almost 100% of the time, if you look back at yourself 5
Yeah.
years from now, you'd be like, oh my God, it was
Yeah.
all this stuff.
For sure. Yeah. It's funny. I'm sure you do the same, where you can probably look at old podcasts of yourself and just see like a different version of you that was doing it, and I do that with my videos. Like, it's some of my older videos, it's just like very cringy for me to watch.
Yeah.
Even now, what I'm working with now is I recently went to, I work with plant medicine twice a year. So it's not something I'm doing like every month or every, it's like I go to Costa Rica twice a year. And I set the intention when I was there about a month ago that I was going to go deeper than I've ever gone, because I wanted to step into the unknown. And I've always had this like thing where I have this like control thing, because I think from creating a business, I find, because my ex-stepmom gave us control growing up, it's like I created my own sense of control within my business, where like I'm always taking action, and I've got this like certain like intention, and that's how I created my safety.
Yeah.
But and when I do plant medicine, it's always like I don't go, also because like we bring in the plant medicine people and all that, but I don't really go too deep, because I'm also around a lot of like subscribers and stuff like that. So there's like probably an aspect where I don't want to go too deep, to where I don't know if it's not necessarily that it'd be too vulnerable for me to go deep, but just like there's a lot of energy that can be projected when you're like somebody that everyone there knows that's going into a deep plant medicine journey.
Yeah. And it would be likely for you to have some investment in it would be harder, I would think, to navigate that when you have so many different projections of who you are.
Yeah.
To kind of, maybe I feel like you might not have this actually, but it would be easy to be more invested to that personality.
Yeah.
When you have 100 people that all know you,
versus
as a
just
certain
being
way.
with like 3 or 4 good friends, and then
Or
like,
nobody knows
or
you
nobody
at
knows
all.
you at all. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's maybe more freedom there, but
Yeah.
because I've always had this where I don't go very deep, because I'm around other people, I said fuck that, and this time I went deeper than I've ever gone, and specifically on Wachuma Day, which is an all-day ceremony from 8 in the morning till like 10 at night. Wachuma is San Pedro. It's a cactus plant medicine, and it's like mescaline's the active psychedelic ingredient in it, but it's very heart open. It's one of my favorite medicines that I do like a couple times a year, but opens up the heart. If anything, you feel more here than anything. It's not like you're blast off like ayahuasca or anything, but I feel such a connection to this medicine that I told the Wachumero, I said, I want to go deep. So he poured me about 40 or 50% more than what he poured everybody else. And I took it, and I had one of the most intense experiences of my life. And this is a medicine that normally is a very social thing. You take Wachuma, and you've done peyote before, yeah?
No, that's not true. I haven't really gone there with it. I've done small amounts.
Small amounts. I thought you said okay, maybe I'm getting a conversation mixed up, but it's very heart opening. You could very much just be in nature and have like it's an all day ceremony of like where you're talking to other people and stuff like that. It's very different than some of the other plant medicines. But anyways, I had such a deep experience where all I could do was let go. Like I could hardly talk. It was such a deep experience because I was what they call blissing out, where I would just lay down and I would just kind of surrender. And everybody that was there that knew me was like, I've never seen you so surrendered before, because I couldn't fight it, couldn't do anything. If I would have fought it, it would have been very unpleasant. But as I closed my eyes, I literally was like not disassociated, but it was like my ego was dissolving to a place to where I was becoming one with everything. And it sounds so hippie, typical psychedelic experience, but like I was literally becoming a leaf is what I told people. Like I felt like I just kept becoming a leaf, to where I was just like laying there and there was not much I could do, but it was such a level of surrender, and it was so blissful that for about 5 hours I was in that state to where I just couldn't talk, couldn't really do anything. And it was kind of trippy. And normally I'd feel very uncomfortable when it would get that trippy, especially with a medicine that normally doesn't get trippy, but I just kept surrendering. And my intention was to go deep so that I could become familiar and I could become more safe in the unknown. And at the end of that experience, I felt so surrendered that even now, even when I go into my cold plunge in the mornings and stuff like that, I'm able to like really tap into that same emotion that I felt back then of just complete, utter surrender. And when I get to that feeling like that, my work now is like learning how to surrender more and to not control as much and to go with the flow. Even the conversation we were having earlier where it's like I have this like kind of masculine perspective as like how I'm going to, get the next things done and progress my business. And then you're like, well, what do you, just do what you do what you like doing, because otherwise it's not sustainable, and that's kind of where I'm going now, to where I'm like, okay, I'm going to tap more into surrender and letting go. And I'm still taking action and stuff. Doesn't mean I'm just completely passive, like thinking and visualizing what I want, but like I'm kind of merging the two to where I'm learning to let go more, step into the unknown. Like this whole next year I have like 5 or 6 live events scheduled. For 2 or 3 years, I didn't do live events, one, because of the stuff going on in the world, and it was like a little bit more challenging to do. But also that was like not a self-sabotage, but that was like a safe way of me just staying and doing internet stuff, just staying on the line, doing videos. And I'm realizing now I want to step out of my comfort zone, and that I'm starting to feel safety in that unknown, even though sometimes it's kind of scary, but yeah, that's kind of what I'm learning now. And I always catch myself when I'm like trying to control shit, you know what I mean? And
I feel like there's so much to, and we'll wrap up because we're going to record on yours after this. It's been over an hour here.
Really? Dang.
Yeah,
Time flies.
I looked down and it was like 45 minutes. I was like, oh man.
Wow.
But
nice.
Hopefully it's the same case for listeners.
Yeah.
The last little thing I think is an interesting thing for me at least, and probably a lot of people, would be the permission. This kind of comes back to the similar things before of like, being puritanical, naughty.
Yeah.
Like you need to go and repent and this and that.
Yeah.
But having the permission to feel joy. Yeah. Or the permission to feel love, or the permission to like really have like a full fuck yeah day.
Yeah.
And not having this underlying guilt that like, oh, like you need to work more, you need to do this more. Like, what does work even mean exactly?
Yeah.
And then within that thing we were talking about before, it's like you don't teach what you know, you teach what you are. Mm-hmm. What was it, like Henry David Thoreau? What was the quote? Like, how's it go? Do what you love, because people need to be around people that are engaged with what they love. That sounds like, what's that quote? You know what I'm talking about?
I don't know.
Come on.
I'm sure I've heard it, but I don't know who it was or the exact verbiage.
God. But anyways, it's like follow your passion, because what the world needs is to be around people that are engaged with their passion.
Yes.
Like that's medicine.
Yeah.
That's supportive.
I love that.
You creating another widget, and replicating that a million times and making lots of money is great. Hopefully you can turn that into something meaningful that actually does provide you real true meaning in your life. But I think there's real magic in being around, like Charles Bukowski calls it the free soul. So being around a person that does, they won't look like a specific thing or sound like a specific thing, but when you're around a free soul, Bukowski calls it, it's like you feel different, like you feel lighter, you feel like they grant permission to the room to just like everyone can just, we can just be.
Right.
Finally.
It's kind of like we were talking about earlier about like, I was telling you how I like to watch Gordon Ramsay sometimes cook.
Right. You don't give a shit about the recipes.
I don't give a shit about the recipes. And even he's a polarizing person, but like he is an artist. Like he is a master at cooking. And that's why his videos have like 10 million views, a video of him just cooking something in like a grassy field. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's just fascinating. It's just, he's in his element. Yeah. And that, I think, is inspiring. It's like, how can I be more in my element? You know what I mean? Yeah. But I like everything you just said, because that's what I'm learning right now, is how to just do that. Yeah. And to not need to...
Or be that.
Or, just to be that, exactly. And not associate doing with being. Like, to know you could just be it. Because I've struggled sometimes even just taking days off. Mm-hmm. Like, just to enjoy a day off. I'm like,
what does that even mean?
I don't even know.
Yeah.
I don't even know.
My only joy is the temporary... upregulation of whatever neurochemicals of reward for me completing a task.
Yes.
Complete the task. Complete the task. It's like a dog, like running after a ball.
Yeah. It's like dopamine spikes. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting.
Cool, man. Thanks for having this conversation.
Yeah, thank you, man. Thank you for having me on. This was fun.
Yeah, I appreciate it. So you started a podcast a little while. You've a bunch.
I've had it for about a year. I'm just putting a lot more. I have a podcast called the Aaron Dowdy Podcast, and then I also put it on my YouTube channel, which is where my main bread and butter, where I started, was on YouTube. But I have the podcast, which is just the audio, obviously, and then I have the video format of it on my main channel. And I plan on doing a lot more like this, where I bring people on like you and friends, and also people that are, you know, experts in their space like you and everything onto my podcast. So I'm looking forward to that, because this is much more fun to me than just like me talking in front of a camera.
Yeah, it feels like therapeutic.
It does, for sure.
Well, I really appreciate you.
Thank you, man. I appreciate you. And thank you for having me on. This is a very nice, fluid conversation. And
Yeah, that's good. All right. That's it. That's how we're going to jump over to the Aaron Dowdy Podcast. So you guys can jump over, check that out. If you feel inclined, thank you for tuning in. Over now.
thank you.